A reflection sometimes exposes more reality than the object it echoes.
I remember when I first played Far Cry 3. I was astounded by the crazy pirate guy who killed my brother and screamed some reference I wouldn't understand for a few years.
Run for it! Run!
The Rook Islands were mysterious and beautiful. The guns were intense and powerful. I was a sheltered child to some extent, and Far Cry 3 was the first game I played that was dark and gritty. When I finished the game, choosing to spare Liza, I sat in stunned silence. After hearing Jason's voiceover,
I can't come back from this. I'm a monster.
I screamed, "What the fuck?" to my sibling, who had played it a few months before me. I was utterly stopped in my tracks. I'd never seen a game pull off a narrative like this before, mainly because the only games I played were, well, Minecraft, Team Fortress 2, and Wii games. Oh, and a few hundred hours of Skyrim. Far Cry 3 opened a whole new world of story and gameplay I'd never witnessed before. I proceeded to 100% the game, which took 90 hours, then played it for another few times at least before shelving it for about 8 years. Now I've played it again, and I have some questions that I need to answer. Some time ago, I saw that the trailer had dropped for Far Cry 6 Lost Between Worlds, the DLC for that game. It looked intriguing, and I started to read the comments on that video. There were the usual jokes at Ubisoft's expense that were funny a few years ago but have gotten rather stale by now, but I saw a specific comment, one that I'd seen many a time before. I don't know the reason for it, but that comment got into my head. It said something about Far Cry 3 being the only true Far Cry game and that everything else after it was trash. That's fine, everyone's entitled to their opinions. That's also a fairly common sentiment. It wasn't that though that struck me. It was that he said that Far Cry had lost its identity. I've seen this said many times before as well, but something about that comment, at that time in my life, said in that specific way, I guess I just felt the need to respond. I wanted to ask the question myself. So I'm making this series, and this is a third episode where I critique and analyze all 9 Far Cry games to find out what Far Cry is, where it's ended up, and where it started. Then I can answer whether Far Cry has lost its identity. If you haven't seen the previous videos, I asserted that Far Cry 3 has become the series' identity, despite it being the third in the series. So in each video, I am comparing each game to Far Cry 3's identity, which has become the mainstream identity of the series, as well as comparing it to the games before it to see how the series has evolved. Or hasn't evolved, for that matter. Let's go back to the Rook Islands and analyze the game that's earned the title of masterpiece many, many times over the last decade. On a surface level, Far Cry 3 is yet another action shooter, full of grotesque amounts of violence, sex, and tired tropes. But below the surface, and I'll borrow a phrase here, there's a Gordian knot of a mangled story paired with a fairly simple set of gameplay mechanics. Yet this game rose to a popularity rarely seen in the industry, and one that companies repeatedly attempt to reproduce. Why was that? What made Far Cry 3 stand above all other shooters of 2012? And why does it stay in our minds all these years later? To get to the bottom of this, we'll break down this game to its core components and find out what the Far Cry 3 identity really is. This is important to going forward with the video series because each game stands in its shadow, something the previous games did not have to do. If you were like me, you played Far Cry 3 first and fucking loved it. Many people's first entry into this franchise was because of Far Cry 3, and so it was only inevitable that this game's story, characters, mechanics, and gameplay loop define the Far Cry series as a whole. In the previous video, I proposed that Far Cry 2 was the game that birthed the formula, yet it was Far Cry 3 that propelled it into the stratosphere of popularity. So let's examine the changes. Of course, the best place to start is the best place to start with any story. Far Cry 3 has one of the most iconic opening sequences in any story ever. And I dare say it wasn't because of story, but because of one character.
Well, I hope your mama and your papa really, really love you. Because you two white boys, you look very expensive. And that's good because I like expensive things. I'm I'm sorry, what did you say? What did you say? Do you want me to slice you open like I did your friend? Shut the fuck up! Okay? I'm the one with the fucking dick. Look at me. Look me in the fucking eye. Hey! You fuck! Look me in the eye. You're my bitch. I rule this fucking kingdom. Shut the fuck up, or you die. What is it, Jason? Jason, what is it? Why aren't you laughing now like you did up there? But is this not fun anymore? Have I failed to entertain you? You see, the thing is, up there, you thought you had a chance. Way up in the fucking skies, you thought you had your finger on the pussy trigger. But hermano, down here. Down here.
We play as Jason Brody, a 25-year-old white Hollywood rich kid, say that 5 times fast, who's traveled to these islands for a bit of fun on vacation with his friends. They're all predictably vapid, rowdy, and generally dislikable. Nobody remembers his opening because of them, though. Vaas is a pirate leader, who is predictably fucking insane. His first appearance is probably the second most remembered moment, but second doesn't mean bad, and it's all to owe to the top-tier performance from Michael Mando. Vaas has taken special interest in these people because of their obvious wealth, meaning he can ransom them for pretty good money. But that leaves us to question why Vaas is intent on giving a very special performance to some of his victims. I chose that word carefully. Performance, keep it in mind.
Where are we? Never should have made that jump alone. I promised Dad I'd take care of you two. Does it say where Riley is? We're gonna find him. We're gonna free the others, and then we're going home.
No! Stay with me, Grant! Please, don't die! Hold on, Grant, hold on! Oh, God. No, no, no!
You wanna fuck?
Grant! Grant!
I like that. No, I respect that. I'm gonna give you 30 seconds. And if this jungle doesn't eat you up alive, I will. Fucking death! I said, get the fuck out of here, you chicken fuck! Run, Forrest! Run!
Vaas kills Jason's brother Grant and decides to play a little game of cat and mouse with Jason. Evidently, he wasn't so worried about Jason getting away. But I ask again, why all the performance? There's helicopters, dogs, and plenty of ground troops to chase Jason. This seems planned to an extent. Vaas had to know Jason and Grant had escaped pretty quickly to orchestrate this kind of a chase. I mean, they were only escaped for what, 5 or 10 minutes? Curious indeed. Also, if you play this game, do yourself a favor and don't play on the hardest difficulty because you'll die really easily during this chase sequence and it's not exactly fun. Just switch back to hard after you get through the intro.
I found him!
Jason gets his first kill of the game almost by accident and narrowly escapes. There's something about title sequences that send a pleasant shudder down my spine every damn time. It's like an official stamp of approval for me to be taken away by a story, and I was taken then, and I am taken now. To this day, this music sends chills down my spine, just like when I was 14. Predictably, someone saves Jason. It was that or wake up on a beach all alone. That's how these kind of hero falling in a river sequence always happens. The man who saves him is endearing.
Insanity. You have the right to take my life. But no, I will also take yours. I am Dennis.
Already, he seems quite confident that Jason is something special. An odd assumption to make of someone you just barely met.
Lava lava. The heron, the shark, and the spider. I know who you are, Jason. You are a warrior. And the Tatao will allow for you to reveal your true self.
Surely someone has escaped Vaas before, right? Absolutely, right? But you and I, viewer, we're the main character of this video game. So of course, we are special.
Ari, I have Jason Brody with me. The man who escaped Vaas camp alive. Your escape is a sign that the battle has turned.
Then we get an important part of a character, their motivation. Of course, Dennis wants to defeat the pirates like anybody else, but all characters need their personal motivation.
They are something, aren't they?
Beautiful, most definitely.
I could have anyone I choose, but my will is set on one woman. Here, cash for weapons.
Oh,
You want to save your brother, right?
I've never shot anyone before.
What do they say in America? There's a first time for everything.
He gives us money for a gun, which is obviously a brazen critique of the military-industrial complex and consumer culture. Subscribe for more 300 IQ takes. Yep, thanks, I'll take my award now. Keep what Dennis said in mind, it's important later. Actually, keep everything in mind, this is all important. You'll be graded on a curve for this, so pay extra special attention. Next we get a series staple. And I don't just mean a Far Cry series staple, I mean every fucking Ubisoft series staple. The radio tower, or just the thing you climb. I don't exactly miss these in the series, but I still do have fun with them. I think their main problem lies in the way they're used in lieu of actual exploration. You see, part of the fun of exploration was the way you walk around, see something cool, and approach it out of curiosity or necessity, depending on the game. Yet, the dreaded radio towers stomped the little dream right into dust. Climbing them isn't the issue, it's the way they robbed me of the fun of my own exploration. When you reach the top and flip the little doohickey, you get this animation that shows places around the tower. The problem with this animation is it's always way too fast to make sense of any of the locations that have any importance to me. The tower also reveals the area around it in the map menu, meaning it's likely the first place you go when entering uncharted territory. This is compounded by other gameplay mechanics, like collecting plants, using the minimap, seeing any mission designated area, or collecting collectibles, because none of those show up on the minimap or the menu map without the tower. So your first incentive in the game is to get as many towers as possible, as quickly as possible, which brings me back all the way to my point. The spinning animation is nigh useless because it shows us a landscape we have likely barely explored. Thus, in the midst of this animation, I have no fucking idea where any of these things are. Far Cry 3's map also doesn't lend itself well to exploration without the towers, because of its samey aesthetic and its lack of obvious landmarks. This game world was not designed like Skyrim or Breath of the Wild. But I'll be damned if I don't mention that the Rook Islands are gorgeous, even 10 years later. Playing this in 4K really brought the world to life, especially since the last time I played it, it was probably 720p at 30 FPS on the Xbox 360. The lighting is moody in just the right way, the foliage is just dense enough, and the water is beautiful blue. Like, it could be Kool-Aid, and I could just drink it if I wanted to. Anyway, Dennis shows us the map, which has changed a fair amount since the previous game. The map you see on screen probably feels very familiar given the incestuous nature of game development. So many game maps function basically identically to this one, but like I mentioned in the previous episode, the map between this game and Far Cry 2 are actually almost functionally identical in terms of what they accomplish for gameplay, but are radically different in how it affects the immersion of the player. It's all about aesthetics. Unlike Far Cry 2, the map of course isn't a menu. This means the player is torn from the beautiful islands to see a UI that feels like it wasn't meant for actual humans to use. Like, by the 9 Ubisoft, who was supposed to use this UI? It feels like the engine or gameplay developers designed it rather than an actual UI developer. Anyway, the map is unveiled by climbing the towers, at which point it shows all the points of interest, which includes side quests, loot, collectibles, hunting locations, and miscellaneous activities. This again hurts exploration, because you never need to take in the world and look at it. Just look at a map, slap down a marker, and follow it. A step down for Far Cry 2 in my opinion. But Far Cry 2's map mechanics weren't kind enough for the casual normies, so they had to axe it in favor of the map menu. So we finish a part of the tutorial which teaches us about upgrades and healing items, which I'll cover in a little while. After that we get our first Outpost. These have changed quite a bit from Far Cry 2, where now you can actually capture them. I think this was a change, not a good or bad change, just a change. It's ultimately part of how this game wanted to convey its messages through gameplay. There's less attempts to feel immersive here based on realism, rather to feel more like a gamey game, if that makes sense. That will be expanded upon later, so we'll keep this conversation centered around the Outpost. The setup for this is that Liza, Jason's girlfriend, is here. So we head there, and the Rakiat warrior gives us the short and sweet in how we can manage Outposts.
You can attack them quickly, pick them off from a distance, or sneak in. It is your choice.
This is the same old Far Cry 2. Outposts can be approached however the player deems fit, within the game's mechanical limitations of course. Far Cry 3 has doubled down on the freedom of gameplay, and it's frankly brilliant. The two ways to go about it are pretty obvious. Go in guns blazing, or sneak in. I usually sneak in and then fuck it up, which results in guns blazing anyway.
Oh, Jesus!
The Outposts are a prime place in Far Cry 3 to witness the Sandbox. Inside these corrugated steel walls, all bets are off and the player is allowed to use all manner of brutality. Going back after a few years, I still find myself enjoying the hell out of the Sandbox. There's less toys in here than the next entries, but it's still fun as hell.
The Sandbox is the bread and butter of Far Cry. That's what makes me love these games so much. You can go as lame as you want, or go as bombastic as you want. I can just kill everyone with a silenced gun, which is probably the easiest way to play this game. Or take out this dog outpost with grenades only. The player makes the fun in these kinds of games, and it's just so addicting. I mean, the Sandbox is so dynamic that you can kill pirates with a flamethrower canister strapped to the back of a dead pyro. It's great. I had that happen, and unfortunately I was not recording. I tried to get it to happen again, but it can't happen.
Okay, Liza, they're all gone. You're safe now.
She's not here.
Predictably, Jason can't find Lisa that easily, and she's been taken elsewhere. But we can get a lead on a friend who's been taken somewhere else. That's supposedly pretty safe. Before we get there though, let's talk about the main criticism of Far Cry 3's story. Far Cry 3's story is supported by an overdone racist trope, namely the white savior trope, also known as a white messiah. The Far Cry series as a whole has plenty of not so different tropes as well, a trope where the hero is also only a step away from being a pure villain by the end, if not outright a villain.
You and I are not so different.
This one isn't a racist trope, it's just one worth noting because it's in like every game. Far Cry 3's portrayal of Pacific culture also is, well, completely non-existent according to someone I talked to online. The tattoos, accents, and native ruins are not really tropical at all, there's something more like Mayan. The only way to perhaps excuse this a bit is that the Rook Islands don't actually exist, but the game undeniably missed out on portraying cultures that are usually left without much to show in Western art. It's a shame because if you're like me, you find the world to be beautiful and have a lot of colorful stuff about it, and you like to see people and cultures outside your own express their own thoughts and ideas through art. But alas, Far Cry 3 is what it is. It's a white man's story for a white audience. You think with all that said that I hate Far Cry 3's story, but I actually really like it. Despite its outdated and well-used tropes, the story is extremely competent, cohesive, and enjoyable. Mostly the characters, I dare say it's my favorite in the series neck to neck with Far Cry 5. Now I know how gamers can be about accusations of any kind of bigotry in their games, even the most milquetoast takes. They've demonstrated well enough how sensitive they are to criticism of their beloved games, but I implore you, if you're angry about what I said, to listen to my whole argument, so my whole video, and reserve any vitriol till the end. Let's not get in a tizzy and start screaming in the comments. Let's have a real discussion like the adults we are, and I think it should be fairly obvious, but I do not think you are racist for liking this game. Liking something that has something problematic in it doesn't make you a bad person. I mean, it depends. If you're like, yeah dude, I like Mein Kampf, it's fucking great, I'm gonna question that. But if that were the case, we'd all be bad people. Who knows, maybe we are. Maybe we're all just bad people. And if we're all bad people, doesn't that mean we're all just normal? Before I get into it though, I want to briefly explain the racist tropes so when we are going through the story, you can understand where they kind of fit in. The white savior, or the white messiah, is a trope where a white person comes to a colored person or person's aid and help them to overcome their issues with their superior knowledge that the white person of course has. The implication of this trope is that the colored person or persons could not overcome their challenge themselves and needed some outsider to come do it for them. This trope of course dates back quite far, becoming especially popular in a post-Civil War US, and seeing its popularity fall in the last few decades, but it's still not hard to find. Notable stories for having the white savior are To Kill a Mockingbird, Avatar, Metal Gear Solid 5, The Phantom Pain. The noble savage trope is one where there is a non-civilized outsider other character who has not been corrupted by civilized society, thus showing the inherent goodness of humanity. Oh, how nice. Many people have said Far Cry 3 employs this trope, but I disagree that it does. The savages in this game aren't portrayed as being especially noble or good versus their counterpart civilized westerners. All of this falls under a social theory of the savages and the civilized, which is a very old, very wrong, and very destructive idea. Although all that is outside the scope of this video, there's plenty of reading to be done on the subject and how it was used in the past. Ironically, Far Cry 2 is something of a critique of this idea that does it quite a bit better than this game, being inspired by A Heart of Darkness, a novella that was written in 1899, where a man details his experience in the African interior and becomes disillusioned to European imperialism and colonialism, and subsequently the idea of the civilized and uncivilized dichotomy in humanity. It's a great read, I recommend it. The audiobook is also on YouTube. With all that said and in mind, let's continue with Far Cry 3's story, which tries to critique these ideas and tropes to a mixed result. On my way to my destination, I was ambushed by some pirates. Then some more, and another few just in case. This moment to me felt like an emblem of what Far Cry 3 has to offer in terms of its sandbox outside of Outposts. The way you move around the world is similar, of course, to Far Cry 2, but unlike the issues with that game's travel, where you always feel like you're obliged to get out of your car and kill whoever happened to spot you, which is clunky and frustrating, Far Cry 3 offers the player more modes of transport. They can easily skirt the roads in the first place, and when the player is on the road, they can often even outrun their attackers. Sure, this may not be as realistic as Far Cry 2, but I like it better for the simple way it plays into the sandbox. If I want to take my little Jason Brody action figure and bash him against some of Vaas's action figures, I can, because it's my sandbox, and I decide how to play with my own sandbox. If I prefer to ignore all of it and fly overhead with a hang glider, which has occurred for the third time now, it's in more abundance than ever, so I can do that. In this case, I chose to fight some pirates. And given I only had starter weapons and no skills, I was almost completely overwhelmed and ran out of bullets, with the last handful luckily making its way into a pirate's skull. Even though Far Cry 3's sandbox may be more barren than the other entries, it still provides memorable moments of emergent storytelling. A big downgrade to me that's never been fully brought back in the series was the way the enemies don't ever become mortally wounded like they did in Far Cry 2. In that game, they could be shot and then lie on the ground in a lot of pain and just kind of haphazardly shoot at you with a pistol. It added a bit more to the combat, and I kind of missed that here. Something about Far Cry 3 is that it's definitely a step up in world design, but still doesn't make it to the point of feeling like a real place. The world itself is very static. You'll rarely see any civilians doing anything but driving cars. There's not a whole lot of action outside of missions and outposts in the world, despite the increased variation of world events over Far Cry 2, which is to say Far Cry 2 actually didn't have any, other than just running into enemies. You can find pirates holding people hostage, or searching for things on the ground, or come across actual fights between pirates and the rock yacht. It's nice, but it's a far cry from making the Rook Islands feel like a tangible place. Sorry, I had to make that pun somewhere in the series. I figured I'd get it in the earlier half, so maybe by the time the end, you forget that I even made the joke. Another great change to the world is the wildlife, which you hunt to upgrade carrying capacity and stuff. There's actually aggressive animals in Far Cry 3, which is something the previous game did not have. And they didn't just add a few, no, they went all out. You got Komodo's dragons, bears, snakes, tigers. Hunting was actually quite a bit of fun, if not a bit tiring by the end of the upgrade path. A funny and very intentional note on all of these is that the animals are endangered. Well, we get to Dr. Earnhardt's mansion and we meet one of the more interesting characters in the game, and likely the most lovable, because most of the characters in this game aren't very likable, let alone lovable.
Yeah, I'm Jason. Dennis said you'd be able to help me, that you found one of my friends.
One of your friends? Huh. I am, distilling a batch later today.
What?
Oh, you mean the girl, Daisy.
Oh, it was Daisy.
I assumed you to be speaking in code.
Where is she?
Well, she's in my house. Here.
Evidently, Dr. Earnhardt is a total fucking stoner. He also appears to be making drugs for the pirates, given his mistaking Jason for a pirate. Though I wonder why there was any code words when there clearly isn't any governing body who the pirates would have to be hiding their consumption from. Earnhardt, to me, showed us how competently crafted the characters in this game are. I was taken aback by how much character they stuffed into just a few minutes the player can spend with him in game. He's a tragic character, participating in the same tragic tradition millions of people do every day, using drugs to quiet the pain. He moved from London to the Rook Islands after his 2-year-old daughter fell from a window and died, and I wouldn't really be surprised if he blames himself for that. It's also widely accepted that Dr. Earnhardt is an analog for the Hatter from Alice in Wonderland, and yeah, I can see it. You don't need to know any of this before playing though, as the writing of the game is very often on the nose with its characters. When we make it upstairs to Daisy, we are in his daughter's room, and we see Dr. Earnhardt even mistakes Daisy for his daughter.
She's burning up.
Yes, of course. When I found her, she had cut her arm, which in itself would be no cause for alarm, but she had cut through a field of anti-aris toxicaria, upas trees. Highly poisonous latex. I have been administering an antidote each hour. I'm afraid that another dosage may be required. I did just examine the box.
It's empty. Where should I go for more?
Set us up with a couple of cave mushrooms and we will be right as rain. Peruse the cliffs. To the west.
Thank you, Doctor. I'm sorry for the rush.
Think nothing of it. The girl must live. For you and me both.
And then there's this money in the background that always bugs me. What does it mean? What does it mean? I may be way overthinking this, but I find it interesting that Dr. Earnhardt says that Daisy cut her wrist, which was obviously a suicide attempt, was no cause for alarm. It's almost as if Earnhardt, on some level, doesn't really see life as sacred, and the thought of Daisy killing herself doesn't really ring much of an alarm bell, seeing as he himself is very, very disillusioned with life, and is likely very laissez-faire about it, to the point where he probably doesn't care much about his own death. Or maybe he just meant that the cut is manageable, even though deep cuts on wrist are definitely still very bad, but who knows, sometimes the curtains are just blue. Anyway, this leads to perhaps the best and most memorable drug trip in the whole series, and definitely this whole game. This sequence drips with atmosphere and symbolism. There's a voiceover from Dennis describing how Jason's path leads to the heart of the jungle.
The jungle speaks only through the warrior. The path leads to the heart of the jungle.
Studio called. I got the role.
And we see that as Jason walks, the cave is becoming the jungle around him, to show his descent into the more wild side of himself.
What about the rest of our vacation?
I thought we could talk about this like grown-ups.
There's multiple snippets of conversation between Jason and his friends, showing that Jason is kind of a prick. This sequence feels very in line with Alice's tumble down a rabbit hole.
Promise that I take care of you both.
Riley is your little brother. He looks up to you.
Hey, you're gonna come to the house around me next month, right?
Yes, sir, I'm busy.
When Jason finds the mushrooms, he takes one like a total moron. Like, dude, there's a bunch right there, just grab all of them. Like, don't you have pockets? Then we get probably one of the most emotionally charged scenes of the game.
Jason.
How you feeling?
You got away, that's how I'm feeling.
The doctor's a real trip.
Oh, he's harmless. Oh, he's kind of sweet, actually. He carried me here. I escaped from the convoy. At some point, I passed out. The doctor saved me.
I'm glad you made it. It's been really rough.
Jason, what's wrong?
Grant,
Stop.
Daisy.
No.
I'm so sorry.
So that's it? What's this?
Are you gonna be okay? I've got to talk to the doctor about the others.
Yeah.
You sure?
Jason, whoever did this, whoever killed Grant, deserves to die.
Can I talk to you?
By all means.
I want to thank you for saving her.
Think nothing of it.
3 of my friends and my little brother are missing. When I find them, can I bring them here?
Absolutely not. I cannot afford to have Vaas's captives here. His men buy product from me todo el tiempo.
Then this is the safest place. He won't think to look for them here.
Please, Doctor. Let him bring the rest here. They'll die otherwise.
Agnes. How can I refuse you? Of course they can stay. Oh, I'm going to need a double dosage to calm my nerves.
I'll be fine.
Wait here, all right? I'm gonna find the others.
Earnhardt, in his clouded state of mind, mistakes Daisy for Agnes, his daughter, and it doesn't help that she's in Agnes's room. Well, you see, that's what the really sad thing about this mansion, is that Agnes died back in London, so Earnhardt created a simulacrum of her room, because he can't let go of Agnes. Then when Jason suggests that they bring their friends here, he's only persuaded when Daisy asks, because he believes her to be his daughter to some extent. Our next mission brings me deja vu of sorts. If you played Far Cry 2004, you'll know why. Jack Carver's boat is named the Medusa. Additionally, halfway through Far Cry 2004, you'll have an objective that sees you fighting and destroying a ship with a comm station on it, just like Jason does in this game. This brings me back to what Far Cry 2 said about Far Cry 2004, which is absolutely nothing. The game was determined to forget Far Cry 2004, yet in Far Cry 3, which of course takes place in the same kind of area in the Pacific Jungle Islands, it clearly takes a ton of inspiration from 2004. We see explicit references to the game, yet this still doesn't directly acknowledge that Far Cry 2004 actually happened. The funny thing about Far Cry 3 is its love for referencing other pieces of art, but the way it chooses to do so is very insightful to me. There are references to popular memes, like the Forrest Gump reference, popular films like Star Wars and Breaking Bad, popular books like Dune, and of course very popular video games like BioShock. In reading the in-game wiki, we have 2 of the weirder ones I recognize, but there's clearly more I'm just not picking up on, but I can tell that are definitely references to things. A reference to the old YouTube channel FPS Russia in the Z93 file. FPS Russia is also a massive fucking rabbit hole. If you really want a few hours of content, just go watch videos about that. And then there's also a reference to the Honey Badger Don't Give a Fuck meme throughout the game. This is all a pointer to how the player and Jason are seen as one. But not just the player, all the players, all of us, with our fanatical love for those popular pieces of art. Unintentional? Perhaps, but I doubt it because this game screams intention in almost every way. The Medusa was a very memorable mission to me when I played the game years ago, and it still holds up as one of my favorite missions. Because of how early it was in the story, most players are likely to tackle it at a low power level, which means you're likely sneaking in there without more than either like an AK-47 or an M1911 or the M133. This power differential between you and the pirates heightens the experience of feeling powerless and desperate that Far Cry 3 definitely strives hard to achieve. Speaking of those pirates, did you notice they're all dressed in red? Bright red, like an extra dangerous traffic cone with an STD?
Ah, shit. It burns like a mother when I piss. Should have used the rubber.
A lot of their cars are red, their outposts often have red accents. This wasn't some random decision that an intern at Ubisoft just decided to do on a whim, because red equals bad. No, it plays into the themes of the game quite well. It's to become more gamey. There's a visual shorthand developers use in a lot of games, and you're likely familiar with it, even if that familiarity is only subconscious. This shorthand applies to almost everything in games, but in this specific case, it's the color coding of enemies to be the color associated with danger. On top of that, red is of course super visible, especially against all the game's greens and blues. It draws the eyes, making it easier to spot the enemy and engage with them. It's exactly what the developers wanted, to encourage aggression and action. This is another step away from the realism that Far Cry 3 sought to achieve. In many games, the same technique is used to designate areas of the game world that players should interact with. You see it in Tomb Raider, Uncharted, Doom, and many others. Plus, even Far Cry 3 does it with a flashing shader applied to all items that you can interact with as well. This time they applied it to enemies in a very specific way to draw your little gamer brain to them with very little effort. Take into account that the Rakyat are all dressed in blue, drive blue cars usually, and often have blue accents in their towns. It's red versus blue, it's about as gamey as you can get.
What's happened?
Vaas prepares to attack our village. He is gathering weapons even as we speak now.
Jason, please, fight for us. The Rakyats will be murdered. If you can sabotage the weapons, it'll weaken Vaas. It'll be easier to kill.
I'll do it.
Ah, I knew we could count on you. The pirates stuck weapons in the logging camp in the jungle.
After the Medusa, Jason is led to a logging camp. This is where a little bit of the white savior trope starts to pop its ugly head. Dennis and the tribe ask Jason to attack a logging camp without triggering an alarm. Then he needs to sabotage the weapons stocked there. The way that the Rakyat simply assume Jason should have been the one to do it, and don't even suggest that any other Rakyat warriors participate in their own fight, is rather telling. It's almost as if Jason, the random white outsider, has just shown up on this island and is now overcoming insane feats in this fight, while the Rakyat are just in the background. The way this is worded simply implies that Rakyat would suffer great deaths if the noble white main protagonist didn't go and single-handedly take out an entire encampment of pirates, which is simply ridiculous. The lead writer of the story, Jeffrey Yohalem, I hope I'm saying that right, claims this game subverts the trope, yet over and over again I see to fail how any of this is actually a subversion, seeing as Jason does take out an entire enemy encampment all by himself. If I were to rewrite this mission to be a subversion of the White Savior, I'd make it so Jason actually just basically fucks the whole thing up after going against the Rakyat's wishes because they had their own plans, only for them to save his arrogant and incompetent ass. To make it even better, don't even make multiple Rakyat save him, just have one super skilled Rakyat do everything Jason wanted to do, but better and with more style. And then save Jason kind of as like a last thought, like, oh, I guess I'll just get you. The white saviorism doesn't end here, of course, but we'll keep a lookout for how Jeffrey might be subverting this trope. This is also where I first bought a new weapon, a Magnum, and this thing hits like a truck. It's extremely satisfying, and even with the sort of outdated audio design, this is a good moment to talk about the way the player gets guns in this game compared to Far Cry 2. Here you're only able to get shitty guns for the first little while, compared to Far Cry 2 where you got a silenced shotgun and a grenade launcher within the first hour or so. I quite prefer this game's weapon progression because, well, it actually feels like progression. In Far Cry 2 I used that grenade launcher for the whole game and switched my sidearm and main weapon out maybe 4 or 5 hours in my playthrough and stuck with those pretty much the entire time. Far Cry 2 limits your options with mandatory restrictions on your loadout. That means you can only have a machete, a sidearm, a special weapon, and a main weapon. What this looked like for me at the beginning was a grenade launcher, a sawed-off shotgun, and a silenced shotgun. Not long after that, it became an LMG, a grenade launcher, and a silenced pistol. A few hours later, it was a grenade launcher, silenced MP5, and a silenced pistol. Then I finally settled on the grenade launcher and the Spaz 12, and an Uzi for pretty much the last about 8 hours of my game. The game really restricts your ability to play around with weapons. In Far Cry 3, I couldn't tell you how many loadouts I tried, because I tried so many. Far Cry 3 is the most free the series has been in terms of loadout configurations. There's no restrictions whatsoever on your equipment. You can have 4 sniper rifles if you want. Late in the game, I used a silenced sniper and the signature sniper that has armor-piercing explosive rounds and the signature SMG and a grenade launcher. The horizons are definitely broadened, and the way the game much more prudently unlocks guns makes the slow build-up to a really sick loadout better than anywhere else in the series. Then there's these signature weapons, which are the most expensive in the game. They have up specs and special attachments. My favorite was definitely the AMR, the sniper rifle with explosive rounds. This thing could shoot cars a couple times, and all that would be left was smoke and bent metal. Anyway, after the logging camp, I made my way to the Pirate's Cove to try and save my friends. Well, that's a half-truth. I actually fucked around doing random side content for about an hour before that. The sense of urgency in this story clashes pretty hard with the side content. Like, I'm well aware of the fact that my friends could be put on a boat at any moment and shipped around the world as sex slaves. Yet I'm still here killing rabid dogs for the locals with an RPG. I almost wonder if this juxtaposition between story and side content was intentional. Like, maybe the game is meant to be showing me how weird it was to do the simple, repetitive, gamey side content while I ignore my friends. Because if that was the goal, it definitely worked. Well, Jason gets caught by Vaas, and we're treated to another lovely cutscene.
Who gave you that, eh? Huh? Ask you a question. Who gave you that, eh? Huh? Teacher gave you that, eh? My sister gave you that, eh? Huh? You think that makes you one of us? You think that makes you like me? Huh? California boy's got a hard on. Jungle fever. I'm gonna drive a bullet through my sister's skull. Like I did your brother Grant.
Here we see that Vaas finds Jason's involvement with the rock yacht to be rather pathetic. He also monologues about family. Evidently, that's something of a sticking point for Vaas.
The only time where I do anything for my sister, the first time I ever killed was for my sister. It's not enough for her. No, please. You see, the thing about our loved ones, right? Our fucking loved ones! They come and they blindside you every fucking time. So they say to me, they say, Vaas, who the fuck is it going to be? Them or me? Me or them? like they fucking think that I need to make a fucking choice.
After that, a chase ensues, which I've always enjoyed. It never gets old blasting away pirates with a grenade launcher. Jason also thoroughly enjoys it, much to Lisa's disgust.
What are you doing? You're shooting at the Jason!
Don't jerk the wheel!
You're not helping!
Drive straight! You're making me miss!
How can I focus? You're shooting at me!
She reacts in a perfectly reasonable way to the whole situation while Jason enjoys the carnage. He's also a huge asshole to Liza. Jason takes this to be such an enjoyable experience that he even quotes the 1979 film, The In-Laws.
Serpentine! Serpentine!
What?
The scene he references is when 2 characters are being shot up by snipers, and they run around in circles. What mindset would Jason have to be in to quote a comedy while being attacked in a high-speed chase?
We did it!
You think almost being killed or sold into slavery is fun?
Hey, Liza, calm down.
And I know I keep pointing out the very gamey aspects, but I promise it's important to bring attention to how much this game is committed to very much stepping in the shoes of the FPS tropes at the time. This whole sequence felt very much 2012. Vehicle chases and escaping from burning buildings in a scripted sequence, very reminiscent of the time. So Jason has a lead on Oliver, and we learn Daisy is repairing a boat to hopefully escape the island. Not sure why they couldn't just use any of the other boats around the island that worked just fine, but okay. And as a nice little callback to Far Cry 2, the animation for repairing the boat is the same as previous games' repair animations for any vehicle, along with the engine being in this little square hole in the floor, also being the same as the one in the boat sequence of Far Cry 2. There's a telling little bit of dialogue between Jason and Liza here as well.
Every night I dream I'm in Hollywood, and then I wake up here.
I'm sorry. You missed your shoot.
It's not your fault. I should have insisted we skip skydiving.
Liza attempts to remove blame from Jason and place it on herself, a common way that people in abusive relationships will stop their partners from becoming agitated. Now, I don't think Jason was like a wife beater or anything, but you can tell he's selfish and often dismissive and overly critical of Liza. There's also a reading of Lisa's character that I'm not sure is actually really supported by the game's text, but I can see how people came to this conclusion. It's just that Jason, who is the embodiment of game protagonists and gamers to some extent, which are naturally an extension of the player, is abusive and rude to Liza as an analog to the way that male gamers are often abusive and rude to female gamers. After replaying this so many times and reading tons of opinion pieces, I don't think that's really what Jeffrey was doing with this character. I'm more leaning towards the relationship being a large part of the story as a way to demonstrate Jason losing his connection to his old life, his old world, his old humanity. This becomes more apparent in the end, so I put a pin in this. I dicked around doing more side content for a while after this, then went and met a new character, Citra. She's the leader of the rock yacht. As usual, the first time we meet a character, it's loaded with character exposition.
Why are you here? I need the strength to defeat Vaas and save my friends.
Is that all? I will not command my army for you. You are a lamb. Not one of us.
Well, then I will become a warrior.
Very funny. Please leave.
He took my brother.
Busted.
And I will do anything to get him back.
There's a very important little moment here that reveals the relationship between Citra, Vaas, and the other main antagonist of the game, Hoyt. To make sense of this, let's take a brief look at Vaas. He was born in 1984, which me thinks is pretty sus. Anyway, he grew up with his sister on the Rook Islands. The person he says he killed for his sister was actually someone she was having sex with when Vaas caught them in the act. Obviously, the relationship between them is a bit strained. I couldn't imagine why. But the part of this backstory that's really important is that Vaas had become addicted to drugs when Hoyt arrived on the island. That's when Hoyt sunk his claws into Vaas and stole him away from Citra. To her, Vaas is dead. Now Jason is here having mentioned that Vaas killed his brother, Grant. It's realizing that Vaas has done to Jason what Hoyt has done to her that ultimately gets her to acquiesce to Jason's request for help. She nearly walks away, but doesn't when he mentions it. She coaxes Jason into drinking a strange liquid. This part always gets me. While walking through this section, Jason sees a man in a white suit. Then he sees 3 little scenes play out that actually haven't happened yet. Does Jason have some sort of like prescience? It's funny because Ubisoft stays away from this sort of thing in the future, so it kind of sticks out like a sore thumb in this game. They keep the drug stuff, just not the weird future sight stuff. When Jason finds this man in the white suit, we have to do probably the worst trailing mission in all of gaming. Like fucking hell, it's bad. Keeping with the times and not in a good way. The place that Jason finds this guy is in a town aptly called Bad Town. I was originally impressed with the way this game shows Bad Town on the map when it's mentioned. It's on the other side of the map from where the player likely is, and it was in an area that likely hadn't been explored yet. This was cool to me because it meant that Far Cry 3 was encouraging me to travel there and on the way engage with other stuff in the story. This was really good game design until I realized you can just fast travel there. Wah wah, nice one Ubisoft. The in-game wiki claims that this place is filled with pirates and privateers. Yeah, no, that's not true. But there's this crazy lady screaming about stuff that she remembers, which includes another Far Cry 2 and Far Cry 2004 reference in one spot. This one is actually a reference to the fact that they were going to make Jack Carver into the Jackal in Far Cry 2, except for they scrapped that idea.
My name is Jackie. I'm a weapons dealer. Nobody believes me, but they blew up my boat. But I survived. No! I was a smuggler and a ship captain, trapped here after the Jackal sold me out.
Anyway, it turns out the CIA is here because, of course, they are.
I work for Langley, Agent Willis Huntley.
Oh, great. I need to get help from the Army and the government.
You can't. I'm embedded, not really in contact with Central Intelligence.
So, you're alone here?
No. You kidding? I got a whole team. They're out in the field, but they'll be back. These scans they sent have opened up a grade A can of worms. I can't talk to you about it, but trust me, it's big.
Sounds huge.
I need more info, though, from the source.
Also, I mentioned the in-game wiki a moment ago, and I want to say that's pretty cool that it has all this detail for how most of the guns got onto the Rook Islands. This is where there's several references, including yet another of Heart of Darkness. On the Lighthouse entry, it was built in 1899 by colonizers, the year the book was published, and of course that book is about colonizing. Right after this is where I decided to play a little bit of the side content. So let's detour for a little while and talk about player progression and some of the side content. By this time I felt like the game's systems were coming into full stride. I'd almost upgraded most of my gear through hunting and was starting to get some of the more interesting skills. The skill tree. Let's talk about the skill tree. By now it feels like every game needs a skill tree. The gaming industry, in its inexorable desire to peek over its classmates' homework, has repeated this concept ad nauseum. Far Cry 3 is likely the one to blame for that. Wait, can we actually blame Far Cry 3 for this? I don't mean as in who actually started the FPS games with skill trees and who made it popular or whatever, but can we actually feel angry at Far Cry 3 for starting this trend? This really applies to all forms of art in the most broad sense, but also down to very granular examples like this skill tree. I've seen lots of anger pointed at Far Cry 3 for making it popular over the years, but it isn't really the artist's fault that everyone copied their homework. And sure, it may be a poor mechanic in Far Cry 3, but that doesn't mean it was Far Cry 3's fault that everyone decided to do it too without thinking at all whether it was a good idea. Anyway, I think the skill tree is a bit poor. It makes sense that they borrowed the idea of XP and skill trees from RPGs. The idea behind Jason's story, and by extension the player's story, is that we see ourselves becoming more powerful through the skills we unlock. And I just don't think it should have been a skill tree necessarily. It should have been a progression meter. The reason this was added in was to make the game, say it with me, gamey. The game showers you in XP to give you a little rush of the progression, and it fits nicely with the themes of the game. I just think the tree itself should have been foregone. There could have still been skills unlocked. You could just unlock them automatically through a meter progression system, then throw an arbitrary player number on the top of the screen too, just for maximum gaminess. This eliminates the aspect I don't like about the skill tree, which is a problem that plagues all skill trees to a certain extent. At some point you'll feel like you can't pick anything good. That's why a metered progression system would fix that problem, because you never actually have to fix anything. So here there'll be a point where you have to choose between either options you don't care to use and options that are actually just straight up plain bad. To me, the biggest offenders were 1. Stone Wall, which reduces animal damage and the chance to be knocked down. This doesn't feel interesting or especially useful. Yes, you'll be attacked by animals, plenty in this game, but the majority of them are easy to see coming, easy to kill, and don't do enough damage to utterly wreck you, even on the highest difficulty. 2 is Deal Maker. It's one of the last skills you'll unlock. By the time you do, you'll probably have more than enough money already. Guess what it does? Yeah, it gives you 25% money for selling items. As a side note, the trash items you collect are obnoxious, and I can't really see what it possibly could have added to the gameplay or narrative. 3 is Penny Pincher. You find more money when looting enemies, pretty much useless by the time you actually get it. Evasive Driving, taking 50% less vehicle damage. I literally never found this to be an issue, even playing on the hardest mode. Not once in my 22 hours of Far Cry 3 did I even use my repair tool. The only time the repair tool may be useful is when you help a randomly generated NPC repair their vehicle. It's a random event where you get some cash for just helping them. I remember doing this once or twice in my first playthrough about 8 years ago. 4, we have some of those extremely conditional takedowns. The pistol takedown, the dual takedown from above, the death from below takedown, dual death from below, and the grenade takedown. All of these are very, very conditional, to the point where I've only used the gun takedown, the death from below, and the grenade takedown a few times. The dual takedowns are so rare that I've never seen anyone do it or have done it in my own gameplay. I'm totally okay with very useless feeling mechanics in games. If I can safely ignore them without hurting my enjoyment, it's alright with me, and Far Cry 3 is a sandbox, so I prefer there to be these options. The problem is that I might be looking at a skill tree deciding between borderline useless skills and some skills that are extremely useful and almost mandatory, like health bar increases, syringe crafting, animal pelt looting. Then there's things like breath control, an upgrade that increases the time you can hold your breath to stop weapon sway. Obviously, it's quite useful. The whole game is designed to make sure you don't need that upgrade to get through it, so it's just a nice little plus. Plus the one after is super useful for sniping, because weapon sway in this game is pretty harsh. But even with things like that, take my friend who literally doesn't ever use snipers. What does that do for them? Well, they'll have to unlock both of those skills that are pretty much useless to them specifically before getting to one that pretty much everybody would want, the Marathon Man, which increases sprinting time to be indefinite. That's an extremely desirable skill, locked behind a skill that feels useless to most people, and one that's completely useless to anyone who doesn't play with snipers. The heavy beatdown skill lets you do takedowns on heavy enemies, which is obviously extremely useful, but it's behind the grenade takedown, which is very rarely useful. at all. All of this to say is that the skill tree is a pretty mixed bag, and due to it being a tree, it leads to moments in the game where you're unlocking really cool stuff, then moments where you're wading through pretty shitty stuff to get the good stuff. The metered progression system idea that just automatically gives you these perks as you level up removes the player's annoyance from the equation. While leaving intact the narrative reasons for the RPG mechanics in the first place, you could simply hide the perks until they drop, letting the player be rewarded for just playing the game without any hassle. Arguably, my idea isn't as good as what they eventually did in Far Cry 5, but we'll talk about that in episode 7. Bottom line, they shouldn't have added a skill tree if they couldn't have made one on par with the better skill trees that actual RPGs often have. But it is what it is, and the skill tree ain't that bad. I'm just nitpicking because it's my video and I have opinions I want to say. Alright, that rant aside, let's get into hunting. This is a love or hate it mechanic for most people from what I've noticed. I find it to be fairly enjoyable. I like the act of going out into the world and hunting down the animals. The problem again is how it's tied into the gameplay loop. You can use animal hides to upgrade carrying capacity of ammo, weapons, loot, cash. This means if you really need or want those upgrades, you'll be required to break from the most interesting part of the game, the story and the combat sandbox, then go and hunt for some stuff, completely breaking the flow in the meantime. What I've ended up doing in Far Cry 3 and 4 when I replay those is just rush around the upgrades early and just get them out of the way, so my game flow isn't broken later on. It's a shame because I could have reworked this at some point to include the joys of hunting while not breaking game flow. I'm not sure what that system would look like exactly, but I think Ubisoft has enough talented people they could have pulled it off. An aspect of gathering that's enjoyable and doesn't break the game flow is the plant gathering. This is an enjoyable mechanic because it can happen while you're on the move from objective to objective. You can gather plants and make concoctions that enhance Jason in some way or another, be it healing, hunting, swimming, or combat. I rarely use these personally, besides healing of course, because I don't like how it makes a game easier that's often already pretty easy. But it's cool that people have the option to craft these very easily and make the game into an experience that they find a lot more enjoyable. I don't mind this mechanic because it adds to the survival the devs wanted, while being unobtrusive to the players who don't find fun using it. Even if you don't want to craft healing syringes, you can just buy them at shops. Granted, that makes you interact with a god-awful UI, but still. If you're really dedicated to not using syringes, you can just use the manual healing. This is a new system that Far Cry 2 sort of had. In that game, you can only get those gruesome healing animations when you've just taken a bunch of damage and need stabilization. Otherwise, you can only heal through healing items. Here, you no longer can find healing items in the world, and you have to craft them all by yourself, but it's not that big of a deal. Of course, you can also always heal yourself manually, it just takes a little bit of extra time. Okay, maybe a little bit more than a little bit, it takes quite a bit of extra time. While mentioning the healing system, they also brought back the bullet-resistant vest system from 2004. I like this mechanic. It's fun to feel a little bit extra beefy by buying one of those. I wish Far Cry 2 hadn't gotten rid of it though. And then Far Cry 3 got rid of the camo suit, so I guess there was a little bit of a switcheroo going on here. That would have been sick as hell in this game though. My guns can have camo, but not me. How unfair. And speaking of that, the gun skins. I always loved this sort of thing, and I found it super cool back when I first played this game. Of course, at this point, it's kind of become the MO for almost every game, but I still like it. I'm always in support of letting the player express themselves aesthetically in the game. I mean, isn't it so cool they can just get skins in games? Like, wouldn't it be crazy if I could, like, pay for those or something? I mean, that would never happen, right? Like, making me pay, like, $5 for, like, an in-game skin. I mean, they wouldn't do that, right, guys? Guys, why is everybody looking at me funny? Getting back to Agent Willis, he sends us to cripple the weed production on the Rook Islands by burning it with a flamethrower. Well, you don't have to use a flamethrower, but it's the most enjoyable. This whole section is honestly very 2012. The only thing missing is Jason wearing a Cookie Monster flat brim snapback, a I Heart Boobies rubber wristband, socks with cannabis leaf print, and a black shirt that says yellow and red on the chest. I just brought back some cringe memories for some people, and I don't feel bad about it at all. If you're too young to remember, it's okay, you're not missing out on much. But yeah, Skrillex plays as you burn down cannabis and get high. That's not how that really works, but we'll allow it. Putting a whole new meaning in the term blaze it, aren't we, Jason? Skrillex is one of those artists that was simultaneously incredibly popular and incredibly popular to hate. I liked some of his stuff back then, and it's still a certified bop today when I'm listening to it while playing Far Cry 3. Does he even make music anymore? Huh, yeah, he does. Oh, how the times change yet stay the same. There's not much to say about this mission other than it's just a bit of fun, and it's super memorable. Well, the plot thickens after this, and so there's a talk about racist tropes. Listen to what Willis has to say here.
You ever go out on recon with your guys?
No. There's a reason I have the American flag in here. In here, there's society, there's order. Out there, the jungle, the synapses in our brains go dark little by little. You forget where you're from, who you are.
Willis is clearly a satirical character, so everything he's saying here is not supposed to be taken at face value. Granted, that's probably what most of us did when we were teenagers, but now that I'm an adult, I can actually understand the scene. What Willis is saying here is very much derived by Heart of Darkness, the novella that inspired Far Cry 2, in which a man travels into the African interior and becomes disillusioned with European expansionism. The main character constantly refers to the way the jungle eats away at his sanity. It would appear Willis here is sort of the character that's fallen into the rhetoric that Heart of Darkness itself seeks to push back on. At the time it was written, the idea was that Africa was a dark continent full of disorder and chaos. As if everywhere wasn't full of disorder and chaos all the time and still is. The idea that a certain place where people is savage or barbaric while another place is civilized was a common way to think, and to this day persists in much of the media we consume. Willis is a satirical critique of this. His monologuing about how he stays in a little shack is very reminiscent of a certain character from Heart of Darkness, Kurtz, who is an imperialist that's more or less started to lose his mind and stays in his little shack quite often. Though Kurtz has gone mad, Willis has resisted it, seeing the outside uncivilized Rook Islands as an affront to his good old American civility. Yeehaw! Though the fact of the matter is that he wouldn't go mad and his brain wouldn't go dark, because that's just not how any of that works. Willis is obsessed with keeping what he sees as a little bit of light and humanity in his home, else he fears he'll devolve. Being that he's a satirical character, these ideas of his are meant to be called into question as well. But I wonder just how the character was supposed to be taken as a satire, other than his obviously stereotypical casual racism. But the game doesn't tie him up as a character in a way that shows a player he was a bad guy in this situation as well. You're just meant to find him abrasive and conclude that everything he says is supposed to be satire, I guess? He more or less just disappears without any conclusion in the story. I'll talk a little bit more at the end of the story about the writer and how he attempted to subvert the tropes this game employs, but so far I'm not seeing how anything is getting subverted, just haphazardly satirized. Satirized. The next half of the scene shows something I find really interesting about Vaas.
Lovely weather we're having. My boss, are you planning a parade? That's why I love you, Vaas. You make me laugh. Everything in business is so goddamn serious. But you, sir, what about Snow White? You know what, I don't give a fuck about him. I don't give a fuck. Really? Then why am I here? Once you've got the ransom money, his friends are gonna be sort of like that. I shot his older brother. I did what you wanted with his younger brother. He's my sister. She's inking that white boy. I don't give a fuck about your family. It is by my grace that your head isn't impaled on the antenna of my car. Therefore, I would like it if you gave a fuck about Jason Brody. Okay, Hoyt. Okay. All right. Fantastic. I'm really loving this weather. What's the name of that village down the road? Barristown? Bunch of native sympathizers. They stole a transportation manifest that's close to my heart. I'd like to pay them a visit. Nice to see you, Vaas.
Better make your way to Barristown.
I bet Oliver's on the manifest. Who has it?
I'll tell you when you get there. I gotta keep on working. See yourself out.
Remember that word? Performance? Vaas isn't performing here. He's subservient to Hoyt. This is the other side of Vaas that's hard to get a glimpse of. I think Vaas puts on a lot of bravado and theatrics for his pirates and his captives as a way to reassure himself that he's in control. But the thing about addiction is that you don't get control. The thing about working for a man like Hoyt is that you don't get freedom. He speaks in a very quiet manner, seemingly unwilling to push back against Hoyt when confronted with his own ineptitude. The next mission is very memorable to me. When Jason shows up to the meeting point, he sees Hoyt demonstrating his power to the people. He also calls them savages, an important point in understanding how this game attempts to critique the savage civilized people idea. This section is brutal, and unfortunately has a basis in reality. A form of punishment in war when captured by the enemy or being sent to prison is to walk across minefields to either find a way across or die trying. That is a real thing, unfortunately, and probably still happens to this day. As we run across the field to help our little guy, he screams, which is probably another reference, but googling that one is really tough, so let me know if you get that reference, because the only thing that comes up is Far Cry 2. There's a movie called Night of the Jackal that the Far Cry 2 game wiki mentions might be an inspiration for the Jackal in that game, but I found no actual evidence for it anywhere but that page, so I dismissed it. Perhaps that's a reference from that? Anyway, we help this guy to figure out Oliver's location. You'll notice I'm using one of the signature weapons, the AMR. It's probably my favorite in the game. Thing sounds awesome. It will often penetrate walls and it kills heavies in one hit. I really like the signature weapons because there's one for each non-special weapon type, meaning most players will find one or two of them to be useful and worthwhile for purchase. Unlike other weapons, they can't be customized, but include stat upgrades and special attachments. Coincidentally, the next mission includes using the same gun in another 2012 certified classic, the mandatory sniping section. There's not much to say here other than that it's generally fun and my aim is shit. Once Oliver is safe and back in the cave, being the most stereotypical stoner ever,
This place is fucking Willy Wonka out.
there's an important moment between Jason and Liza.
Hey, I'm building a cross for Grant.
Thanks. Haven't really had time.
We have to talk.
We will, just not now. I need to find Riley. If anything happens to that kid...
I miss you. Okay, and you're carrying all these weapons and you have all these weird tattoos and... I'm not saying you shouldn't go rescue them. I'm just worried it's affecting you.
Lisa, don't worry. I'm taking control of my life for the first time.
I know, you're
That's
right.
a good
You've
thing.
been working really hard on that, and I have a studio job waiting for you. I helped Steve.
Oh, look, I don't want to talk about your exes right now. All right, this is my path. I've got to find it on my own.
Okay. Okay. I get it. You're stressed out. We can meet up later. I love you.
Liza is more or less spot on. She's a reflection of how Jason's changed, a vestige of his past self. He pushes back in this conversation because he's pushing back on himself as he used to be. There's an interesting little piece of easily missable story here. Dr. Earnhardt has left some yummy little feel-good candies out for all the kids. When Jason takes them, we get to see a flashback to earlier in the vacation. I wonder how many people missed this. I did all 3 flashbacks in my first playthrough. The first one isn't packed with backstory, but it confirms that Jason and Lisa were in some sort of a disagreement, probably about her wanting to go back to Hollywood early for that role she was offered.
Girlfriend troubles?
Told you?
You know, Jason, Lisa is a keeper.
Then Jason and Daisy have a conversation that's extremely uncomfortable.
Hey, I got a crazy question. You won first place at that swimming championship this year, right?
Yeah, 400 meter.
What did it feel like, winning? Not afterward on the podium, but in the water when you hit the pad.
Like I was really present. Like the whole world was me.
You know, I never thought I'd be able to kill someone. The first time it felt wrong. Which is good, right? But now, it feels like winning.
Are you okay?
Yeah.
It's not by chance that he used the word winning. He's the player. We're the player. We're winning the game. He's winning the game. You can take the pill a second time and get another flashback that sees Jason going and looking for his friends in the bar, only to find that his brother and his friends were struck by a bit of a scam in the bathroom. After that's over, Jason gets a call from Willis and makes a Kill Bill reference.
Willis, is that you?
Jason, I zeroed in on your friend Keith Ramsey. A hitman who works for Hoyt purchased him. He's usually at the bar in the shantytown.
What's the guy's name?
Buck.
So his name is Buck, and he lacks...
Then Jason finds Buck in Badtown.
You must be Jason Brody.
Look, I just want Keith.
Jason. God, we're not all savages here. We're just businessmen, responsible capitalists. I've got something that you want, right? That's a product. You've got something that I want.
And what the hell is that?
Temper, Jace. Be careful. If you do me in, you'll never get him back. Find this for me. You score that, and you and I are even, Stephen. And Keith goes with you.
Bring me what has been lost.
I've seen this knife before.
Knife? What do you mean knife? It's not just a fucking knife. It's art. No history in this and you and Keith's 4 arches squeezed together.
Knife is the one that Jason saw in his dream. Buck proceeds to take Jason on a wild goose chase through the islands to find that knife, seemingly doing so mainly for the fun of it. This section of the game often gets goofed on because it's basically turned into Uncharted. I often find myself dreading this part of the game for being a bit boring. The sights are neat, sure, but all too often it feels so similar to other games that have done this sort of thing like way better. During all these missions, Buck seems to know where Jason needs to go to collect these pieces of the compass that's needed to find the knife. Each time, Jason runs into pirates in the old ruins, which is obviously confusing and a bit counterintuitive. This isn't confirmed in game, but it seems fairly obvious. Buck was using Jason to get the compass while sending pirates to those locations in hopes of Jason getting caught, meaning he could collect on the bounty that Vaas was out for him. He'd then have his compass, the knife, and a lump sum of cash. He's a hitman for Hoyt, so he's actually hiding the fact that he does know where Jason is, just giving possible locations to the pirates. He's playing both sides basically in some way or another. This character is a tough nut to crack and very much feels like the culmination of Yohalem's purposely obtuse and puzzling writing style, combined with perhaps some cut content or developmental issues. I have researched Buck's character quite a bit and it seems like no one really has any idea what the goal of this character was other than to be a villain. He's obviously a compelling villain seeing as he's raping Keith, but the clues about Buck leave me stumped. His full name is Bambi Buck Hughes. Buck being a nickname. This game is just way too referential, and Bambi is too famous of a name for that to be a coincidence. Yet Jason quotes Kill Bill, referencing the character in the movie, named Buck of course, that raped the main character of that movie. Fitting him into the Alice in Wonderland themes of the game feels best with the Cheshire Cat, given the way he appears and disappears, leading Alice to some sort of destination. I've had a ton of fun with this game, and haven't found myself as stuck as I am here. Something in this puzzle is just missing for me, and I'm convinced that that was on purpose. But what I do feel confident in, and even picked up on when I was a little idiot 14-year-old, was the way that Buck sort of represents the way historians and archaeologists have gone to frankly disgusting lengths to uncover history. These days I have a much more full, much more cynical understanding of archaeology and the way it's harmed people and communities. Between Western Victorian era assholes literally eating thousands of mummies, to the way artifacts are kept in foreign countries by private museums, to the Nazi obsession with finding rare artifacts, it seems all too obvious that Buck partially represents this. He's some white dude showing up in a poor community looking for artifacts, convinced that his love for history supersedes everyone else's reservations. You could take that sentence and apply it to literally tens of thousands of people who have lived in the past few centuries. Maybe that's all Buck is. Another aspect of the game critiquing the way that white cultures have harmed non-white cultures. But all the other clues about Buck point to there being another aspect they simply have not been able to crack open. So I'd hate to say it, but I'm kind of just giving up on this. Let me know if you have any ideas in the comments though. So I'm moving on then. After I got through the linear level designs and did admittedly enjoy the views, I was ready to be done with Buck's quest. Far Cry just doesn't work very well with linear design. Jason then hands over the knife in return for Keith and prompts one of the most stomach-turning cutscenes.
Keith. Please, no more. Please, I beg you. I can't take any more. Jason, you gotta get me out of here. I'm begging you, please. You gotta get me out of here, man.
I'm getting you out, okay?
Yeah, you promise. You gotta promise me.
Yeah, look, about that, mate. I am grateful, right? And, I'd really like to show my appreciation, you know? Proper. Like a man should.
You said we could leave, you fuck!
No, actually, what I said was, Keith could leave with you, but you're not going anywhere.
We're walking through that door.
You are what I say you are. I'll take your bloody if you like. I like my meat rare.
Some people consider the inclusion of a character being raped in this game to be distasteful because it doesn't dedicate enough time to that character. I understand this criticism well enough, but I just disagree. The argument goes that you should never include rape or sexual assault in a story unless you're going to go hard into exploring these things. Or even some people say you should never include it at all, unless it's a focal point of the story. Or even some people say yet that it should never be included whatsoever. My problem with this is that it more or less moves the subject of rape and sexual assault to the sidelines, only to be focused on when the writer and the viewer want to be focused on those specific subjects. This limits the role these things can play in a story. Talking to my partner, who has unfortunately been raped too many times to count, what a fucking sickening thing to have to say, I found that they like it when these things are included but not strictly focused on, because when the story isn't just about those things, it doesn't mean that those acts are encompassing a whole character, the way that the trauma of such an event can feel like it encompasses one's whole life. And then I have another friend who was raped and prefers it to never be brought up, no matter the context, fictional or real or in the news, nothing at all. The point of this is to say that people and stories are complex, and just because any particular person feels that they don't want a story to have it only be a side plot or a backstory doesn't mean that's how all stories should be, and that making all stories that way is the right fit for people dealing with such things. The point of me saying all this is that people and stories are complex, and just because any particular person feels that they don't want a story to have it only be a side plot or a backstory doesn't mean that's how all stories should be, and that making all stories that way is the right fit for everyone dealing with such things. Sorry I got so dark, but it's a dark subject matter. Personally, how this affected me when I first played the game, I found Keith's reaction to his pain to feel too close to home. Being a little baby teenage boy, I felt restricted in my ability to express pain, because boys don't cry, remember? To see Keith go through one of the worst things a human can go through, only to be automatically unwilling to let his friends know, felt a little bit too close to home for me.
You'll be safe. Look, just don't tell them about this, okay?
I won't.
All this fuck, man. I thought I could handle my shit. And I can't.
Look, you'll come back from this, alright?
None of us will.
I'll get Riley, and we'll be back in Santa Monica in no time.
I, of course, have never been in Keith's situation, but I know the way that the automatic impulse feels. And I suspect many of you do too, to hide the pain we experience, as if experiencing pain equals weakness. I believe this is very intentional on the writer's part, given how macho and masculine Keith is portrayed as in the flashbacks. I'd also like to mention that it's good that this game is willing to depict a man going through this, seeing as far too many people think it's literally impossible for a man to be raped. This game is rated M, of course, but that didn't stop a bunch of teenagers from playing that. It means a bunch of teenage boys were hopefully taught to respect that fact. Alright, moving on from the darkest part of the script, Keith drops a bombshell.
Riley's dead. I'm sorry. He tried to escape and they shot him.
Keith?
I'm sorry.
Jason can also have his final flashback here, where we see the con artist try to take the revenge, and all the friends run onto an elevator to escape. There's a particular song that plays here called I Think You Freaky by Die Antwoord? Die Antwoord? I have no idea how to say it, and I'm honestly not going to be bothered to look it up.
Whoa! Look at the lights!
Keep it in mind though, in the elevator we find out that this is where they got the idea to skydive. This is also the last time we see this random friend here that's just in the flashbacks, who was clearly a cut character, so cut they didn't use his voice lines, but not cut enough to remove his character model from the cutscenes. If I had to guess, this guy was a techie nerd guy who hosted LAN parties and sold pirated CDs as a teenager. I'm also pretty sure he's the friend that Vaas said he cut open in the beginning of the game.
Do you want me to slice you open like I did your friend?
It's funny how nobody mentions this dude for the whole game though, assuming he was the friend who died first. Anyway, Jason goes to give Citra the knife, and she calls him out on his lie a little.
What is it you desire?
To save my friends.
Are you sure?
I want to kill Vaas and Hoyt.
Then feeds him some mythology as a way to prime him for some of her own uses, which we'll come to understand later on. In the meantime, the Rakia actually do something against Vaas for once.
An attack against a convoy of prisoners taken by Vaas.
Wait, what's the plan?
An ambush. Go meet the men that you will be working with. They're in Churchtown. They'll be very happy to help you.
But of course, Jason is involved anyway. But it's nice that the Rakia have some tiny crumb of agency in this story.
these guys. These guys look organized.
How the fuck was this truck not suspicious at all? Anyway, Jason's right, these guys aren't pirates. They're better equipped and organized. When Jason gets to the truck, this happens.
Hey Jason, you miss me?
And what follows is definitely the most iconic and well-remembered aspect of Far Cry 3.
Did I ever tell you what the definition of insanity is? Insanity is doing the exact same fucking thing over and over again, expecting shit to change. That is crazy. But the first time somebody told me that, I don't know, I thought they were bullshitting me, so boom, I shot him. The thing is, okay, he was right. And then I started seeing it everywhere I looked, all these fucking pricks. Everywhere I looked, doing the exact same fucking thing. Over and over and over and over and over again. Thinking, this time, it's gonna be different. No, please. This time, it's gonna be different. I'm sorry. I don't like the way you are looking at me. Okay? You have a fucking problem in your head. Do you think I'm bullshitting you? Do you think I'm lying? Fuck you! Okay? Fuck you! It's okay, man. I'm gonna chill here, man. I'm gonna chill. The thing is, alright? The thing is, I killed you once already. And it's not like I am fucking crazy. It's okay. It's like water under the bridge. Did I ever tell you the definition of insanity?
Oh, Jesus.
Naturally, Jason survives because he's the main character. Next section is a more linear area that sees Jason have all his guns taken away. This reminds me of the Far Cry 2 prison section. I like that they kind of worked it a little bit into Far Cry 3 in some way, because it's always fun as a player to have your power momentarily decreased, forcing you to rely on your game knowledge to function, not just raw damage numbers. And then it wouldn't be a 2012 game without a helicopter crashing sequence.
Did I ever tell you the definition of insanity?
When Jason wakes up, he's pulling himself out of a pile of bodies. Given the way this game is drawing symmetries between Vaas and Jason, you can see what they're going for here. Right after this, Dennis lets Jason know that the boat is almost ready and Jason can leave soon. He also lets Jason know that Vaas's island has never been successfully attacked, an important detail to remember for a few minutes. Citra then gives Jason another drink so he can have an hallucinogenic experience about fighting a demon, which is meant to be his internal confirmation that he has a power to overcome Hoyt and Vaas. When I first played this game, I found this inclusion of the boss to be very jarring, and it doesn't feel any different now. It's got boring mechanics, but at least it looks pretty cool. Then Jason wakes up to Citra on top of him, heavily implying that they had sex. This whole scene is constructed in a way that is meant to inherently play into the fantasy that gamers have. Get the girl, be powerful, be the hero. Obviously it's dubious whether Jason could have consented, and I wonder if Jeffrey Yohelem really considered it, but I think it plays nicely into the point of this cutscene. The game just assumed you wanted to have sex with the sexy princess lady, because that's what every action hero man is supposed to have, right? It's what gamers are supposed to want. We're in it for the power, for the fantasy. This game is a giant satire about what games are, being dubbed an anti-game, if you haven't picked up on that by now. This is where it's finally time to take out Vaas, which is probably the best section of the story. I felt so ready to take him out when I played this game. I didn't feel any different this time. Vaas's compound is on an island full of pirates, go figure. As you approach the compound, you'll hear that I Think You Freaky is playing very loudly. The same song that Jason was doing the robot to in the nightclub. Far Cry 3's screaming symmetry theory is as loud as it can through the screen right now. This whole next section has an abundance of TVs. When I was 15, staring at my own screen, I was half fancying the idea that this game was trying to tell me something with those, but who knows. A funny little detail here, All the villains in this game die by a knife. Vaas stabbed Jason with a knife. We see Jason, Vaas, Citra all being one person. A person who wants power, who craves the ability to hold others' lives in their hands. Citra reassures me that I'm powerful. Jason, yeah.
Are you enjoying my sister's company? Huh? She's gonna make a warrior out of you. You're so fucked, Jason. Pull the trigger. Come on, motherfucker. Pull the trigger! You are me, and I am you.
I can't kill myself. Vaas, or is it Jason, Citra maybe?
Why won't you die? Take me into your heart! Accept me as your savior! Nail me to the fucking cross! And let me be born!
I may have killed Vaas, but I'm not dead. I'm still Jason.
Citra, I won.
Here I am, staring at the black mirror. It stares back. I ask myself why Vaas was in all those TVs. I ask myself if I look into the black mirror for too long, who looks back? What does Far Cry say about me? I wonder what Far Cry 3 implicates me in. Citra reassures me that I'm indeed a big man. I'm Jason, a big warrior man. I am powerful.
You fought well, warrior. Arise. Enjoy your victory.
Jason decides to stay on the islands and let his friends go back home without him. Then we get a little bit of a backstory on Dennis that enlightens us on why he is the way he is.
Jason, you're leaving so soon.
Dennis,
You're busy working with Citra? We are not unlike each other, you and I. I was once an immigrant to the United States. I worked as a mechanic in a garage. They tried to make fun of my accent. The owner, he tried to pay me less than the other mechanics. They were not as skilled. I was raised among the generals of Liberia. They tried to treat me less than them. But I know who I am. Look at me now.
Dennis is an interesting character to me, because he doesn't show up a whole lot, but is really in the background of the first act and a little bit of the second act, allowing the developers to use him as a tutorial giver. Getting his backstory makes it evident that, yeah, we're not so different. Dennis had a rough upbringing in Liberia, only to find out that the US isn't as welcoming as one would like. There he felt what it was like to be powerless, when he felt powerful among the generals of Liberia. So, just like Jason, he sought power and strength in the Rook Islands. He's yet another mirror character to Jason, almost seeming to live vicariously through him. You don't ever see Dennis doing anything. He never picks up a gun, he never goes and directly opposes Vaas, just guides Jason to where Citra wants him. Dennis is basically Citra's failed errand boy, and Jason is the one that's filled that role since he arrived. All of this talk of Citra, Vaas, and Jason is begging me to go back to the white savior stuff. But I'm going to hold off on this until the end, where we can take a look at Jeffrey Yohalem's defense of the whole white savior critique. Naturally, Jason's friends don't take his staying on the islands very well.
I'm not going.
What?
What are you talking about?
I found my place. It's here, on this island.
Jason, are you serious?
Liza.
I am just trying to get a read on this.
For the first time, I know exactly what I want, and I'm not gonna let it slip away.
You are all grown up. I've been waiting for this forever, and now you're leaving me.
Goodbye, Liza.
Jason really just finally cuts his last piece of his old life out. He doesn't even hug Liza, and actually steps away from
Liza,
her.
let him go.
So that's the end of Act 1, which is when you're allowed to get to the second island. A lot of people took issue with this, and I can see why. Suddenly the life of this game, Vaas, has been removed for most people, meaning this game feels much less compelling. The story is written such that, with very little modification, Act 1 could have been a whole story, and it would have been good enough, and no one would have questioned it if Ubisoft had just ended it right there. The second island, in terms of gameplay, increases the game's difficulty. Now we're fighting privateers with armor, better guns, and bigger numbers. You'll notice that there's more patrols, outposts have more waves of enemies when the alarm is sounded, and there's more enemies per wave. The structure of the world is directly lifted from Far Cry 2, where the second map is meant to kick up the difficulty, though that game mostly functioned off a dynamically scaling difficulty system that meant the more reputation they got, the harder the enemies were, meaning that once you were on the second map, it's harder via that system, and not necessarily because the devs put harder guys there. I like these changes because it meant there's a bit more to spice up the gameplay. Where my opinion differs from most players, it would seem, is I actually like the way that Vaas dies about 65% of the way through the game. It shows that Vaas was just a cog in a machine, in Hoyt's machine. It shows that the terror on the Rook Islands isn't just a local issue, but it's an international issue. Hoyt has connections all throughout the world, and the islands are just his base of operations. It allows us to see how power structures are constructed and used to harm communities and environments. Before moving into the rest of the story, I think this is a good place to talk about the side content. I mentioned hunting, outposts, and radio towers, but there's a bit more to it than that. I'll start with the worst of the side content, the collectibles. This comes in three forms: relics, memory cards, and letters of the lost. The letters are a collection of World War II soldiers writing letters for one reason or another, always found in Japanese bunkers. They're kinda interesting, but there's 20 of them, and it's hard to care about 20 of them. The memory cards are various bits of research on different drugs. Again, kind of interesting, but doesn't exactly intrigue me by the 20th one. And then there's 120 relics. They don't offer you anything other than giving you rewards for collecting them. All the collectibles do this, but the relics do this most because there's 6 times as many of them. I appreciate that Far Cry 3 gives me a reason to do these with those little rewards, but they're easily one of the worst parts of the game. I don't mind some collectibles in games, but 160 is just too many. Some of them were interesting to get to, but for the most part they were just boring. It's the same issue as Far Cry 2. You can safely ignore these in Far Cry 3 and have a perfectly fun time. I'd actually just recommend buying the maps for them as well. I buy these ASAP when I'm replaying just to make my life a little bit easier so I can unlock weapons a lot faster. Next are the 3 types of side missions: Wanted Dead, Path of the Hunter, and Story missions. Wanted Dead was my favorite because it's more of a reason to engage with the sandbox. These missions see you killing a captain or two with a knife. They'll be surrounded by other pirates you can kill in any way, it doesn't matter. These are quite fun, and I almost always instantly do them when they're unlocked. The Path of the Hunter ones are a big old meh for me. They're just hunting with a specific weapon, so that might mean hunting a bear with a pistol or rabid dogs with an RPG. They're good on paper, but they get boring after a little while. They exist to give you the final animal hide for your upgrades, but can be safely skipped. Lastly are the 14 story missions. These are a mixed bag. They're usually comedic and usually only take a few minutes to do. I won't go over all of them, but I'll mention that one of these is a reference to the diamond collecting of Far Cry 2. It's actually an okay mission. Probably a fan favorite was the one where an old lady says she saw a plane crash, only for Jason to realize that the plane that crashed did so years ago, then only to realize once more that there's no old lady in that town. Spooky. It's just a fun little quest. The thing about the side content in Far Cry 3 over Far Cry 2 is that there's actually a lot more variety, and generally they take a noticeable less time to do per activity, meaning that even though it's repetitive, there's still a lot more variation, and it's easier to get through than it was in Far Cry 2, so the repetition doesn't really drag on me too much.
editing goose here, there's actually 4 types. There's also the supply run missions, which require Jason to drive a vehicle through a set course in the allotted time. Over the course of the game, these become more difficult and use a variety of vehicles. They're fairly fun for what they are, even though the vehicle handling is noticeably worse than Far Cry 2. Then there's the challenges. They're actually pretty fun. My favorite is the one where you get a new gun every time you get a kill. These missions were just an excuse to let the developers put the player in intentionally weird scenarios, and I'm kinda here for it. There's actually leaderboards, but because Ubisoft cancelled the online stuff, it's no longer accessible, and you can only see the scores the developers hit. This really does feel like old school gaming. Leaderboards that devs had access to first. You just don't see things like that anymore. One of the other major changes from Far Cry 2 is that Jason got X-ray vision. This is never really explained. Actually, it's just not explained at all. But now you have a camera that can spot enemies and allow you to see them through walls. Previously, you could use a little telescope type thing to spot stuff in Outposts. I find it very interesting the way this kind of caught on with other games. I think game devs have realized players prefer a less realistic approach to stealth. If the player feels well informed on the situation, they can make decisions that feel impactful and fair, even if it's actually completely unfair that the player can see through walls. Oddly enough, I've recently experimented with turning off enemy markers and tagging in Far Cry 6, and I found this lessen my enjoyment. I'm sure the developers noticed this in playtesting, and that's why it stuck around for so long.
So, Jason meets Sam, a fairly lovable, albeit shallow character. He proposes that Jason steal a uniform and blend in the way he does. Fair enough, but the mission where you actually accomplish this is, well, it's just obnoxious and downright annoying. It starts with you having to throw a rock to distract this privateer. You can't just kill him though, you have to distract him. Far Cry is usually worse when the game restricts the player from using the sandbox, and this is exactly what they're doing here. Why can't I just kill this guy and use his uniform? There's literally no one else that can see him. I've been killing people and hiding their bodies all throughout the game, but I guess here it just doesn't count. Then you have this other guard you just have to follow, rather than killing him and hiding his body too. It just doesn't make sense. The whole mission is just made worse from its weird arbitrary rules. Like, why can't I kill any of these guys and take their suits? What's so special about them? Well, when Jason gets his random arbitrary suit that he apparently couldn't get anywhere else, he gets a new employee initiation.
Ah, my rosy-cheeked new employees. I'm not going to lie. We're all here to make a buck. But it's the happiness of my people that gets me up each morning. My father, rest his soul, was a diamond miner. Got up at the crack of dawn each morning, smoked a cigarette, down into the earth he went. For that wonderful, wonderful man, the company was God. I bring that same reverence to my humble business here. And I expect all of you to do the same. If you break one of these rules, I roast you in the furnace until your skin crackles like a chicken. Right, enough talk. Those savages want to destroy my life's work. It's called mud. My pride and joy. Show them we mean business. Ah, I almost forgot. We have a special on this man. Your very own island. For the head of Jason Brody.
Now, I know the common criticism for Hoyt is that he's an over-the-top villain just to outdo Vaas. I don't think that's the case. He was a very intentional character. It's not like Ubisoft as a whole lost their control and Z buttons when writing the script only to be told the game needed to be longer, so they just added Hoyt on and couldn't go back and rework Vaas or something. If they'd wanted Vaas, he would have stuck around. Hoyt is just as well-rounded of a character, we just don't get to see him as much. The next mission sees Jason getting proof to show Hoyt that he has traitors on the island, thus gaining his trust. The actual gameplay of this is basically just extra large outposts with a side of an extra objective, looting 3 of the men implicated in the plot. I enjoyed it. You'll notice the wingsuit and the parachute, which have become staples of the series by now. Far Cry 3 was the one that introduced that. It also loves cranking that FOV up on the wingsuit, which makes it extremely awkward to gauge distances and land where you want. Otherwise, it's still extremely fun to use. The privateer suit also means Jason won't be spotted by other privateers unless he's attacked by them or enters their restricted areas, which usually are outposts. These little changes make approaching outposts on this island just a little bit more interesting, since you can walk right up to them and not cross the line, unlike the previous island where you get spotted if you weren't hiding. To compensate for this change, you'll notice that the outposts have little to no walls, making the way you approach them more free. It mixes up gameplay for the last few hours, and I appreciated that. The game also just unlocks several guns for you that you would otherwise needed radio towers to do. Anywho, the next few missions are Jason and Sam gaining Hoyt's trust. They're fun and they're some of the more bombastic missions, but they're light on the story, so that's all I'll say. When Jason and Sam meet Hoyt, Sam gets sent outside and Jason and Hoyt have a one-on-one. Most of this conversation is exposition dumping, and the rest is Hoyt being comically evil by blowing up a boat of hostages. He monologues about the beauty of the industry and how he operates a slave trade. He asks Jason to go interrogate a prisoner, something Jason does without any pushback. Turns out that prisoner is Jason's brother, Riley, who was thought to be dead, but surprise, he's actually alive. My guess was that Hoyt wanted to gauge the cruelty of Jason to see if he'd actually torture his own brother. Riley goes along with the act because all 3 of them know that getting Riley out of there would probably be a death sentence for at least Riley, if not all of them. The fact that Jason would torture his own brother shows a descent into utter madness. Hoyt then invites Sam and Jason to poker night. In the meantime, Sam and Jason sabotage the privateers and Hoyt. Dennis also gives a call and asks him to forget about Riley. This is rather revealing, seeing as the whole time Dennis has been helping Jason get his friends back. Clearly it's been a ruse the whole game, because once Dennis, and by extension Citra, thought Jason was powerful enough, they dropped the act. Jason also finds out that Sam is from the US because everyone intervening on the island is from the US. Makes perfect sense, seeing everything the CIA has done for the last 70 years or so. After this, Jason and Sam get on with that poker night, and it doesn't really go as planned.
Sorry. House rules. Ah, look at that. We have the same cards. So let's raise the stakes a little, shall we? Boster? Jason Brody? Whatever your name is, it slipped my mind. How stupid do you think I am?
True to being the Queen of Hearts, Hoyt makes Jason gamble for his life after killing Sam. Hoyt more or less confirms he knew all along who Jason was. It was made obvious by the way Jason's face was shown in the footage on the TV in the basement. He also admits he didn't expect Jason to be so destructive. Basically, Hoyt screwed up in thinking he could have seduced Jason to becoming a high-ranking privateer. So this poker game is a way of cleaning up that mess by getting rid of Sam and trying to get Jason on board again.
I'll admit, I underestimated you. Torturing your own brother. Destroying half my organization?
Obviously that doesn't go as planned.
Oh, Jason. Now we'll never be married. You know, you could have joined me.
Hoyt's flaw was thinking he had total control of his own little world. Jason makes his way to the airport, and it's a total bloodbath while Flight of the Valkyries plays, mirroring Hoyt killing those hostages while listening to the same song. One could reasonably assume that Jason is hearing this in his own head, as he's clearly enjoying this immensely. He even makes a Star Wars reference during this, mirroring the way he made pop references while saving Liza during their chase.
Yes. Where are they? Where are my friends?
I couldn't halt the jungle warriors. I'm sorry. They carried your friends to the temple.
Unfortunately, and a bit predictably, Earnhardt has been attacked and dies at the hand of the rocket yacht. One would assume that they only killed him because he was protecting Jason's friends, but I wonder if they did it because now that Vaas was gone, they wanted to get rid of anyone on the island associated with them. Since he sold drugs, well, he had to go.
Look at you. Big, strong, powerful. Why would you want to go back to what you were? Now, you are perfect.
Finally, Citra talks directly to Jason, and by extension us, the player, reaffirming our prowess and might. She gets close and admits her love to the player, to you, and me.
Love you, Jason.
We walk down a path of fire and brimstone, where the Rocky Eye bow to us, showing us how much respect we have earned. A demon to demonstrate the way Jason feels antagonized by her and his past.
You are living in a fantasy world. I'm going to erase all of it.
And here comes a choice that represents the major choice Jason needs to make. But of course, it's a button prompt, meaning Jason doesn't make the choice. We do, the players. When I first played this game, I struggled to understand why this was even an option. It seemed like a cop-out. A way to add drama and have a good and bad ending without any real consequences. And that's a sentiment I've heard echoed often. But this choice isn't about consequences, it's about the player choosing to turn back and stop the violence. Or to get greedy and decide to get the girl, get the princess, have epic gamer sex with her, and, well, ultimately die, because she used Jason, for her own purposes. But not before reaffirming the player one last time that they are powerful and skilled.
Ultimate warrior has given himself in the place of the coward Vaas. Hold me. You are perfection, the ultimate of your kind, and our child will lead the Rakyat. Rage against the darkness.
Getting the good ending, if you can really call it good, means Citra continues to reaffirm Jason until she dies. She begs for him to continue on his path.
Why must you leave? You will stop being a warrior, a hero. Your friends, they will move on. Have kids and boring lives. Stay here. The jungle will always be there for you. You will always be king. With them gone, you never have to leave.
This violence is over. I'm done. No more blood.
She even blocked Dennis from killing Jason because she still needed him.
I love you.
Jason! What is wrong with you? She's trying to save me. She saved all of us. And you reject her love? Ah!
Obviously that didn't go so well.
I love you. Don't leave me.
I'm sorry.
Citra, please. Do not leave me, please. Citra, I am sorry. Citra, please don't leave me.
I've killed so many people, I've lost count. I can't come back from this. I'm a monster. I can feel the anger inside me.
I am. Still, somewhere inside me, more than that. Better than that.
Jason thinks he can change. Far Cry 3 is a mirror to the face of gamers, asking us why we engage in violence in video games. And Jason believing he can change is Far Cry 3 believing the industry can change to have more variety, games that aren't just bloodbath power fantasies. Since Far Cry 3 has come out, some of the biggest games year after year have been noticeably non-violent. I, myself, still mostly play violent video games because, well, they're fun. What does that say about me? I'm not sure, and to be frank, I don't really care much either, but I respect the game for opening the conversation. Even if BioShock did it like 5 years before and did it better, BioShock was obviously an inspiration for this game, in case that was obvious. So this leaves us with the elephant in the room, the racist tropes. This next section will be me explaining why I think Far Cry 3 ultimately failed to subvert that trope. But before that, I want to ask you to think of a time in your life that we've probably all experienced. Have you ever made a joke, or had a friend who made a joke over and over to the point where it wasn't funny? To get more specific, how about ironic jokes that were used so much to the point that they stopped being ironic? As an example, remember when saying deadass was a thing? Like a lot of meme words and phrases, I said them ironically at first, only to eventually just start saying them. There's a point where you're just doing something ironic so often that's lost all satirical value and you're, well, just doing it. My point is that there's a point where satire is no longer satire because you're just doing the thing. That's what Far Cry 3 does. It tries to satirize the tropes by subverting them, which is fine, that's a totally legitimate literary strategy, but doesn't actually end up subverting them. In an interview, Yohelem says, "The end of the story is very blatantly a subversion of any kinds of racist tropes. What I feel like what's happened is to explain the story you need more than a sound bite, and I feel like a lot of people just glancingly looked at the thing and got upset. They didn't actually explore the whole game." Well, I explored the whole game and I am still unconvinced. How does he think he subverted the trope? If you choose the tribe, Citra kills you. It turns out you were being used by them. The entire time you thought you were the leader of the whole tribe. You were nothing. You were just the gun that she had upgraded with tattoos. He's right. She did use Jason. But that doesn't subvert the trope of the white savior. The reason why is what I said before. It doesn't matter that Citra used Jason. It matters that Jason, some white kid from Hollywood who's never used a gun, becomes a one-man army. He just did the thing. He saved the whole tribe. Up until this point, the tribe was clearly in dire straits, unable to defeat Vaas, seeing as they literally controlled the entire island. Citra seeing some white kid haphazardly escape and going, I guess I'll use that one, almost reinforces the idea of a white savior, because the context of the story makes it clear that she hasn't found any other tribe members who were powerful enough. She believes in a totally ridiculous idea that one man could take on Vaas and Hoyt alone, and then it actually just happens. And it's just the random Hollywood white kid who's extremely privileged and out of touch. Jason almost single-handedly saved an entire country. Nothing about Citra being the one to decide that he should do it makes that not true or actually satire. When Jason decides to go after Vaas, Dennis informs him that no one, which is to say no one in the tribe, has been able to take out Vaas on this island. But Jason single-handedly walks in there and kills 20 dudes and Vaas. Then he does it for the entire southern island, while taking on stronger enemies. Sure, he had some help from Sam. That just makes Sam a white savior too, and also Willis by that logic. Willis and Sam did their small part to help Jason white savior it up. The game's text simply does not work to subvert it. I'll have the full interview below if you wish to read it, just be aware it's a bit long. I want to make it clear, once more, me saying that this game is a white savior story doesn't mean I think Yohelem or Ubisoft or players are some scheming racist or something. Yohelem himself seems quite happy that people are talking about this game so much, and holds no ill will against people who think this trope is used there. Maybe he's a bit frustrated, and I'm sure after 10 years, it grinds on him a little bit, but don't go harass him or something. Like, I feel like I shouldn't have to say that. Like, the fact that I feel like I have to say that is just stupid as hell. I'd also like to point out that the idea of Citra being a princess doesn't actually need saving, thus subverting the trope of damsels in distress also doesn't work for the same reason that the white savior doesn't work. Similarly, with another way that Yohelem tried to argue that this wasn't a white savior, that Jason wasn't ever actually in charge of the Rakyat because they were using him the whole time. This works well in pursuit of making the game anti-game by pointing out that the power we seek in games is just a farce. Which is cool, but it doesn't actually subvert the princess trope, for the same reasons before. Everything the game does to subvert that trope is undermined by the very fact that Jason actually did save them, with the help of the other outsiders, being Willis, Sam, and even Dennis to an extent. They actually did just save the princess, they saved this whole country. I fully believe that Yohalam and the other designers were fully intending on subverting tropes. The signs are all there. Yohalam has stated that he doesn't think people have engaged with Far Cry 3 deep enough, so I've tried to do my best with that. I believe he and the rest of the team have made a game that does adequately ask the player to think harder about it. I don't think he and the critics will really ever see eye to eye, because even upon closer connection, it's hard to see what he sees. In all the interviews I've read, he always seems to just kind of dance around and never say specifically what the game is about. I mean, hell, he even contradicted himself one time by saying that the game was not about guns in the interview that I referenced, while also saying the game was about guns in another interview before. There's almost an implication that Jason is an unreliable narrator, thus his point of view should be scrapped entirely. This leaves us with an unsatisfying story though. That means the takeaway is what amounts to this is all a dream basically, and it doesn't let us know if he actually even saved anybody or hurt anybody or anything like that. Do the Rook Islands even exist? Did he die in that river and this is all of his brain just firing its last synapses? I'm not sure how to approach the game's story at all if this is all in his head. This is the only way the game wouldn't be a white savior story though, is because it didn't happen. It was just some guy's delusion and all happened in his head. A compelling idea for a story for sure, but this idea makes the game's text nigh unapproachable. And frankly, I just don't buy it, because if the game was all a dream, I think the story would have played out differently, or we'd have a more solid hint that he's in a coma or something. The best hint to this that he might be in a coma and he's definitely imagining something to some extent is all the magic and the way that Jason seems to see the future, implying magic exists in the world or that this is a dream, and Jason can have prescience since, well, it's all in his head and he can know what's going to happen. But why would Jason's subconscious make up all these characters that seem to specifically critique his own fantasy and the premise it's based on? Is the implication that he was well read enough to know the complexity of these tropes and how to critique them, yet still played out all of this in his head this way it does? It just doesn't amount to anything that feels reasonable. I believe what we see on screen is mostly accurate, and he did actually kill a bunch of people and actually saved his friends and so on and so forth, including saving a whole country. To add to the way that Far Cry 3 is an anti-game game, the ending choices play into it pretty neatly, perhaps unintentionally. If you choose Citra, you are choosing to not let your power fantasy of gamer titties and explosions end. But she makes it end anyway, because, well, games end, and the credits need to roll at some point. Picking Citra is saying, I prefer video games. The game kills Jason because his stupid video game skills are pointless. The player needs to let that die and look away from the black mirror from time to time. Basically touched grass dweeb, that's what the game is saying. Picking Liza is saying, I'm done with this. It's a cool way to understand the game's ending, even if it wasn't entirely intentional.
By the end of this essay, I've come to realize how similar, yet how different Far Cry 2 and 3 are from each other. Far Cry 2 pursued realism in an attempt to interrogate what fun was in games. Far Cry 3 pursued an intentionally unrealistic vision in an attempt to interrogate what was fun in games. It's two sides of the same coin, two paths to the same goal. While Far Cry 2 was more interested in understanding if pushing the limits of reality in a game can be considered fun at all, such as the malaria system, Far Cry 3 is more interested in understanding the way gamers fuel their fantasies through games and how extreme it can be made.
Ultimately, Far Cry 3 is an exaggeration of action games that's seeping from the seams with constant references to the fact that it's a game and that it exists among a bunch of other things that are super popular, like other books and movies and of course other games. The way it portrays its characters are deliberately over the top, and even has details like the word Rakyat literally meaning tribal people, or the islands being named the Rook Islands as a way to outline this exaggerated experience. The developers filled it with tropes, gameplay mechanics, and ideas that were a reflection of its time, which was 2012 again, in an effort to move away from the realism that Far Cry 2 sought to achieve, and into a much more self-aware piece of art. Personally, I love art that recognizes itself for what it is and interrogates that. There's a reason why I spent the last few months reading so much Vladimir Nabokov. I just eat that shit up. Off topic, sorry. Far Cry 3 is a great game. It's a tight, enjoyable experience that shines in spite of its issues. Even 10 years later, I had a blast playing it. It's got a magical soundtrack that just hits different. The Far Cry series hasn't reached this height of narrative cohesion in its design in almost any of the other games in the series. But we all know Far Cry 3 isn't as good as Far Cry 2004 because you can actually drive the forklifts in that game. So... And I'll just add as a gripe, but there's way too many fucking tutorials and notifications, They also disabled online play for this game and left in the error when it tries to connect to the servers but can't. This error box happens about half the time when you open up the menu. Update the fucking game, Ubisoft. Just disable any attempts to connect to the internet, or just disable the notification. I bet it's literally as simple as just deleting a few lines of code. This game's also a good case study in how writers with the noblest of intentions can still screw up and make something that contradicts their own intended messages. Far Cry 3 is rightfully held in high regard despite its shortcomings. Look, we all screw up. It's part of the human experience. We do things to the best of our abilities, but in the end we can grow because there's always more chance we can do better. And just like Jason, you can find the best inside yourself and nourish it to something you're proud of, no matter how much you think you screwed up. And unlike Jason, none of us are murderous, rampaging narcissists who have killed hundreds or thousands of people. So keep your head up, because you're not as far from the top as you think you are. Thanks for watching. Whoa there. You think you're leaving? You think you're gonna leave my video? Well, that's rude. Well, I just want to give a huge thanks again for watching. This video was a huge project for me. I think it was a step up in quality from the previous two videos, and I am definitely looking forward to making more and hopefully getting better at it. If you made it this far, obviously I did something right, so please go ahead and comment, subscribe, and like. I really need the engagement if I want this channel to grow, and I do want this channel to grow, so I'd really appreciate that. And as far as what you should comment your favorite game in the Far Cry series. Doesn't matter if you played them all, if you've only played one, just tell me which one's your favorite. And if you haven't played any of them, I don't know how you made it this far, but I don't know, tell me your favorite type of food or something. I don't know, tell me how your day went. Anyway, goodbye.